Elara Vance was a cartographer of grief, mapping the landscapes of loss in her own heart. She didn't believe in destiny, only in the stark, unchangeable geography of the past. Her life hadn't truly changed when her mother's long illness finally ended last week, or when she became a single mother 5 years ago. It had been a slow erosion, not a sudden quake. But the moment she heard a man's voice behind her, thick with a syrupy poison, and felt the stranger beside her tense as if a live wire had been touched to his skin, that was the earthquake. It happened 32 minutes after takeoff, somewhere over the darkened plains. She was in 22B on a packed flight from Denver to New York, returning from a funeral with a suitcase full of her mother's folded memories and a daughter breathing softly against her arm. The man beside her was a statue carved from shadow. He wore a dark hoodie, his face angled toward the front of the cabin, his posture a study in controlled stillness. It wasn't indifference, it was a state of readiness, a coiled spring. Elara hadn't tried to engage. The armor she wore against the world was too heavy for small talk, and besides, solitude was her oldest friend. Then the voice slid through the cabin's hum, 2 rows back. It was low, slick, with a casual arrogance. "Bet you'd be warmer without that jacket," it said. "Why don't you take it off, sweetheart?" Ice traced a path down Elara's spine. The words were quiet, meant only for her, a secret she never asked to keep. She didn't turn. She didn't breathe. He spoke again, closer this time, and with his voice came the ghost of a touch, fingertips grazing the back of her headrest, a casual violation of her space. Her back went rigid. "Please don't touch me," she said, her voice low but firm. The only reply was a wet, mocking chuckle. And that's when the statue moved. He didn't erupt, he flowed. With a silent, fluid motion, he unbuckled his seatbelt and rose to his feet. It was the movement of a man trained to eliminate hesitation, to act in the space between thought and consequence. Elara barely had time to register it, but she saw how he positioned himself, not directly between her and the harasser, but at an angle, a human shield ready to deflect a blow. It was a stance born of experience. The harasser smirked, raising his hands in mock surrender. "Hey, easy there, man. Just having a word." "You're done talking," the stranger said. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper, yet it cut through the cabin noise like a razor. The entire row seemed to freeze. "I said, back off." The words weren't loud, but they were heavy, forged from something unyielding. The man behind them laughed again, a nervous, ugly sound. "Who the hell do you think you are?" The stranger tilted his head, a flicker of something dangerous in his eyes. "I'm the last person you want to test at 30,000 feet. That was all it took. A flight attendant, alerted by the sudden tension, was already moving down the aisle. Whispers rippled through the nearby seats. Within minutes, the harasser was being escorted to the back of the plane, muttering curses under his breath. The stranger sat back down. There was no triumphant glance, no puff of the chest, just a return to that profound stillness. Elara turned to him, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. "Thank you," she breathed. He gave a single sharp nod. "You're welcome." She looked at him then, truly looked. A strong jawline, eyes that were constantly scanning, hands resting on his knees with an unnerving steadiness. He carried himself like a man who had nothing to prove because the proof was buried in experiences he'd never speak of. "I'm Elara," she offered, her voice still trembling slightly. "Liam," he said. No last name, no follow-up question, just a calm, solid presence. And though she couldn't possibly know it, Elara had just met the man who wouldn't just change her life, he would anchor it. The quiet that fell over the cabin was heavier than before, thick with the residue of a conflict avoided. Elara's hand rested on her daughter Lily's shoulder, a protective gesture. The little girl hadn't stirred, her small chest rising and falling in the innocent rhythm of sleep. As the adrenaline receded, a tremor started in Elara's fingers. Liam hadn't relaxed. His broad shoulders were still tense, his gaze still fixed ahead. He was a sentinel at his post. "Does that happen often?" she asked, her voice barely audible. He turned his head slightly. "Too often." His calmness wasn't passive. It was forged, a discipline learned in places where unraveling meant death. "Thank you," she said again, needing him to understand the depth of her gratitude. He gave that same minimalist nod. Nobody should have to say thank you for that. Elara let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding and leaned back. After a few minutes passed in the dim cabin, she glanced at him again. "You don't seem like a guy who works in tech." A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Why's that?" "Just a guess," she shrugged. "You didn't hesitate. The way you stood up, it felt practiced." Liam was silent for a long moment. "Military," he said finally. It clicked into place, the posture, the calm, the readiness. It all made sense. "Army." "Air Force," he corrected gently, then added, "Retired, sort of." "Sort of?" He looked down at his hands, then back at her. "I still do some consulting. Let's leave it at that." It was a clearly drawn boundary, and she respected it. The cabin light softened to a warm amber. "I didn't think this flight would be the most frightening part of my week," she admitted, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. He turned to her fully. "Rough trip? My mother's funeral." He nodded once, offering no hollow platitudes. "I'm sorry," he said, and the simple words held more comfort than 1,000 well-meaning condolences. "What about you?" she asked. "Work, mostly." No elaboration was offered, and none was needed. A comfortable silence settled between them, the kind shared by people who recognized the same shadows in each other. Lily stirred, murmuring in her sleep, and Elara smoothed her daughter's hair. Liam's gaze softened as he watched the small gesture. "She your only one?" Elara nodded. "Lily, she's 5, going on 50. "She's lucky," he said. "You're strong." She raised an eyebrow. "You got all that from watching me almost fall apart in 22B? "No," Liam said, his gaze direct. "I got it from how fast you found your voice." The words landed with unexpected force, and she had to look away, out the window where the clouds swirled like a silent, beautiful chaos. For the first time in 5 years, she wasn't weathering the storm alone. 2 hours later, the plane descended onto an unfamiliar runway. Heavy snow slanted across the windows, obscuring everything but the lights of a small, isolated terminal. "This isn't New York," Elara murmured. Liam was already leaning forward, reading the cabin's anxious energy. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing an unscheduled landing in Nebraska due to a blizzard on the East Coast. A collective groan swept through the plane. Elara closed her eyes, the weight of the last few days crashing down on her, a funeral behind her, a blizzard ahead of her, and a layover in the middle of nowhere. "Hey!" Liam's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. "Breathe, one thing at a time." She opened her eyes. "You always this calm in a storm." His lips twitched. "I've been in worse." When the doors opened, freezing air blasted into the cabin. They were given the option to deplane and wait in the terminal. As Elara hesitated, looking at the sleeping Lily, Liam stood and reached for her carry-on. "I've got it," he said, not asking for permission. The terminal was a small, quiet pocket of the world, smelling of stale coffee and exhaustion. Liam found them a spot in a warmer corner, and Elara gently settled Lily onto her lap. "She'll be out for a while," she whispered. "Not the worst place I've been stranded," Liam remarked, his eyes scanning their surroundings. "Bet it's not the best either." "No," he agreed, a real smile finally reaching his eyes. "But at least here nobody's shooting at us." She gave him a look. "Is that a joke?" He shrugged. "Not really." A moment later, a staff member with a clipboard approached, offering hotel vouchers for families with children. "There's limited space, so we're prioritizing single parents," the woman explained. "That's us," Elara confirmed. "Great. We're assigning shared shuttles and rooms, 2 adults max. If you're traveling alone..." "She's with me," Liam said, his voice leaving no room for argument. The woman glanced at him, made a note, and moved on. Elara stared at him, wide-eyed. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he said calmly, "but it's past midnight, you're exhausted, and you're not dragging a 5-year-old through another line of paperwork." She nodded, the words "thank you" feeling inadequate for the 3rd time that night. The hotel was a simple roadside stop, but it was warm and quiet. In a room with 2 queen beds, Elara tucked Lily into one, then stood awkwardly in the middle of the room. Liam placed her suitcase by the door and sat on the edge of the other bed, creating a respectful distance. "I can take the floor," he offered. "It's fine," she shook her head. "You've done more than enough." She sat across from him, a single lamp casting a soft glow between them. "Do you always step in like that? For strangers on planes?" He thought for a moment. "No," he said, his voice lowering. "Only when I'm reminded of what silence can cost." She didn't ask what he meant. She didn't have to. She was beginning to understand that his past was a country with closed borders. But for the first time, she found herself wanting a visa. It was nearly 1 a.m. Snowflakes danced in the lonely glow of a parking lot lamp. Inside, Elara sat on her bed, facing Liam. "You said silence can cost something," she said, breaking the quiet. He stared at the carpet, searching for a memory he could bear to share. "Her name was Amina," he said finally. "She was a local interpreter in Afghanistan, fearless. She had more courage than most of the soldiers I served with." He leaned back, his posture betraying a deep old pain. "There was intel, a threat. We didn't act on it fast enough. I didn't speak up. I waited for confirmation, for protocol." He met Elara's eyes, his own gaze steady and haunted. "She didn't make it." The words settled in the room like fine ash. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "She was 23, he continued. "She deserved better than my hesitation. So now, when I see someone afraid to speak, I don't wait." Elara nodded slowly, understanding the profound shift that follows such a loss, the internal compass that is forever recalibrated. "When Lily was born," she found herself saying, "I didn't know if I could do it alone. Her father, he left before she was born. He was in love with the idea of being a dad, not the reality." She gave a small, humorless laugh. "I stayed in my hometown, took care of my mom, worked 2 jobs. I thought just holding it all together was strength." "It is," Liam said, his voice firm. "You're still standing, that's what counts." A lump formed in her throat. She blinked quickly, turning away as Liam quietly crossed to the mini-fridge and returned with 2 bottles of water. "Hydration helps," he said with a wry smile. She laughed, a genuine sound this time. "Is that military wisdom?" "No. That's just what you say when you're afraid to offer someone a tissue." The shared moment of levity was a small bridge between them. "I don't usually talk to strangers like this," she confessed. "I don't usually end up in Nebraska hotel rooms with people I met 4 hours ago," he replied. "So we're even." He stood to switch off the lamp between them. In the semi-darkness, his voice was softer. "I meant what I said earlier. You're strong, even when you think no one sees it." He lay back on his bed, and a moment later, Elara did the same. Sleep wouldn't come. She stared at the ceiling, listening to the rhythm of her daughter's breathing and the profound silence of a man who had opened a locked door in her life. She didn't know what it meant, but in the stillness of that snowy Nebraska night, she didn't feel like she was carrying the weight of the world alone, and that was everything. The next morning, the world was hushed and white. By noon, they were back in the sky, flying over a sea of clouds. The landing in New York was a jarring return to reality. Concrete, noise, relentless motion. At baggage claim, as Elara retrieved their suitcase, she saw Lily holding Liam's hand, a simple, trusting gesture that made her heart ache. "She's a strong kid," Liam said, gently letting go. "She gets it from her grandmother," Elara replied. They stood in the awkward space between a shared crisis and an unknown future. "Well," Elara said, breaking the silence, "thanks for everything. Do you need a ride?" "No, my friend is on her way." He nodded. "Okay, take care of yourself, Elara." "You too, Liam." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. "Will we see him again?" Lily asked, looking up at her. Elara didn't have an answer. 3 days passed. Life resumed its familiar rhythm, but the silence in her apartment felt deeper, the city colder. That night, she opened her laptop and typed his name, Liam Cole. At first, there was nothing. Then she added, Air Force. A 6-year-old press release surfaced with a blurred photo of him in uniform, Colonel Ethan Cole, decorated for leadership in a hostage recovery mission. Most of the details were redacted. He hadn't told her his rank, his full name, or the commendations. He had protected her not for praise, but because it was his nature. The next morning, her doorbell rang. It was Liam. He wasn't in uniform. The shield of distance was gone. "I had some leave time saved up," he said simply. "How did you—" He held up his phone. "Your address was on the luggage tag. I wrote it down, just in case. There was no arrogance in it, just a quiet honesty. And your daughter left this on the plane." He handed her a folded piece of paper. It was Lily's drawing, 3 stick figures holding hands. Elara looked at the drawing, then back at him. She stepped aside, holding the door open. "Come in." He stepped over the threshold, and just like that, the world shifted again. Not with a crash, but with a quiet, certain click. Sometimes the detours are the destination. In the living room, Lily was already coloring in the stick figure labeled Liam with a bright orange crayon. Liam stood by a shelf of photos, Elara and her mom, Elara holding a newborn Lily. His presence both strange and fitting in this space filled with pastel toys and warm blankets. "I still can't believe you're here," Elara said, handing him a mug of tea. "I wasn't sure I would be," he admitted. "Then I saw that drawing." He nodded toward Lily. "She doesn't let many people in," Elara smiled. "With you, it was instant." He'd looked down, almost uncomfortable with the praise. "I think kids know when someone is for real." Just then, a sharp knock echoed from the door. Elara frowned and opened it to find a man in a dark, impeccable suit, a badge clipped discreetly to his belt. His eyes went past her, landing squarely on Liam. "Colonel Cole," the man said, his voice flat. Elara felt a chill. Liam stood, his entire posture transforming, becoming the colonel from the photograph. "I'm on leave," he said, his voice firm. "This isn't about your leave, sir. It's about the Cairo file." Liam didn't flinch. "That file is sealed." "Not anymore." "What's going on?" Elara asked, looking between them. Liam turned to her, his expression softening. "It's nothing, a formality." "We need to ask you a few questions, Colonel." "Now," the agent insisted. Liam exhaled slowly, then looked at Elara, his eyes full of a silent apology. "I'm sorry." He stepped into the hallway, pulling the door closed behind him, leaving Elara standing motionless in the sudden, deafening silence. The apartment felt hollow without him. Elara found herself back at her laptop, her fingers typing Liam Cole Cairo file, before she'd even consciously decided to. She found a buried article on a military watchdog blog, a sealed operation, rumors of a civilian casualty, and one line that stole her breath. Sources suggest a decorated U.S. officer suspended operations after the mission, citing personal responsibility for a decision that cost an innocent life. She leaned back, her mind racing. Amina, Cairo. He hadn't just been telling her a story, he'd been confessing. A week passed in silence. His phone went straight to voicemail. Then, on a quiet Thursday morning, she opened her door and he was there, standing at the bottom of her stairs. He looked tired, not physically, but spiritually, like a man who had finally stopped running. "I shouldn't have left like that," he said. "I thought I was protecting you by keeping my past separate. I didn't realize you weren't the one who needed protecting." A long moment stretched between them. "What happened in Cairo?" she finally asked. He looked down. "I gave an order. There was a child in the building. We didn't see her until it was too late." He looked up, his eyes raw with a grief that would never fade. "You live with those decisions. You don't forget." Elara stepped aside. "Come in." He hesitated. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "You're not the only one who's had to live with ghosts." He stepped inside, and in that moment, she offered him not forgiveness, but permission. Permission to be human. He placed his wallet on the table, sliding out his military ID, Colonel Liam Cole, United States Air Force. "I figured it was time you saw the whole story," he said. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want to be the uniform," he said. "I just wanted to be Liam." "You always were," she whispered. "I just didn't know the rest." Just then, Lily padded into the room, rubbing her eyes. She blinked at Liam, then a huge grin spread across her face. "You came back." He knelt, and she threw her arms around his neck. "I said I would." Later, at the kitchen table, Elara asked, "So what happens now?" Liam met her gaze. "That depends on you. I've spent my life being deployed to missions I could solve, but this..." He gestured around the apartment at Lily's drawing on the fridge. "This isn't a mission. I want to be here not because I saved you on a plane, but because I'm choosing to be. Because this is the first thing in a long time that feels like home." "I don't need a hero, Liam," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I just need someone who shows up." "Then I'm already here." He reached across the table, and she placed her hand in his. It wasn't a dramatic kiss or a grand declaration. It was a quiet, steady pressure. It was enough. Fall gave way to winter. Ethan's presence became a steady rhythm in their lives. He showed up after long days, sometimes with cookies, always with a quiet desire to simply be there. One night, sitting on the fire escape overlooking the glittering city, he handed her a small envelope. Inside were his official, honorable discharge papers. She looked up confused. "What is this?" "I'm done," he said, "with deployments, with disappearing. I've served long enough. For the first time, I want to serve something I choose." He looked at her, his voice low and certain. "I choose this." 1 year later, Elara stood in a school auditorium. Lily, beaming, was graduating from kindergarten. When the ceremony ended, she ran straight into Liam's arms. He lifted her into the air, spinning her once. He didn't need a uniform anymore. Everything that mattered was right there. Elara walked over, and Lily reached for her hand, connecting them. The three of them stood together, a small constellation under a ceiling of paper stars. And Elara finally understood. The hero of your story isn't always the one who swoops in with thunder and glory. Sometimes he's the one who weathers the storm beside you, the one who stays. The story of Elara and Liam is a powerful reminder that heroes aren't always the loudest in the room, and that sometimes our greatest journeys begin with an unexpected detour. If their story of courage and quiet love touched your heart, please let us know by giving this video a like and subscribing to Stories for You for more content that moves you. We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us about a time a stranger showed you unexpected kindness. Thanks for watching.